A couple of years ago, I found myself in a very disturbing situation. I was getting off of work at my internship in Charlotte, North Carolina. It had been snowing all day. For those of you who live in the South, you know it's a big deal when snow is even forecasted. And grocery stores are raided the night before. I decided to get some groceries since the mayhem had ended, and only people like me with trucks or all-terrain vehicles could get around. So, I went to Walmart, got the groceries I needed, and started making my way back to my truck. It had begun to snow harder, and there was already 5 to 7 inches on the ground. It was around noon at this point. I was daydreaming about sledding and watching movies over the next couple of days with my then girlfriend, now wife. Just as I almost reached my truck, I was jolted by someone grabbing my arm. I turned around to see an older-looking woman, maybe 56. She asked if I had any cigarettes. I don't smoke. So I told her that I didn't and turned back to my truck. Again, she gently tugged on my arm and said that she had just arrived from Alabama on a bus with her granddaughter and dog. Bye. She was in town for breast cancer treatments and needed money for a hotel. I honestly told her that I had no money on me. I do unlike contributing to people's potential drug habits, and would rather buy them food, if that is what they really need. At this point, she asked, "Do you know the area well?" Wanting to get out of the situation. I lied and said I didn't, thinking that she would leave me alone. I was surprised when she said, "Oh, okay. Well, since the weather is so bad, will you drive me to my hotel so I can meet with my granddaughter? Beer in the lobby waiting. It's right up the road here. I can show you." Being a Christian, I was taught to help people. I already felt guilty about the white lie I had told, even though everything in me was screaming no. I agreed. I was raised on the rule, never judge a book by its cover. Plus, I'm 6 feet tall. I figured I could handle her if things got dicey. So, against all odds, she hopped into my truck, and we took off. The next thing I knew, she was smoking a cigarette, and I politely asked her to put it out. I had missed my first red flag. She had asked me for cigarettes earlier, and she clearly already had some. She obliged and threw the cigarette out the window. We started driving toward this hotel, and I was on high alert. I was running through worst-case scenarios in my head when I noticed her fumbling through her purse while glancing at me out of the corner of her eye. I said, "Just so you know, I have a gun on my truck, so please don't try anything crazy." I did have a gun. It was a shotgun I had neglected to remove from my back seat a couple of days prior. It would and have helped if she pulled a gun out of her purse and pointed it at me, but she didn't know that. She immediately stopped rummaging through her purse and pulled out her cell phone from her jacket. She looked at me and said, "Actually, do you mind taking a detour? I need to pick up some money from a friend." The red flags were now screaming, but I couldn't go against my programming in that moment. I told her it was fine, but we should make it quick because I needed to get back home. She then dialed someone and said, "Yeah, this guy is coming to bring me to get the stuff. You're ready, right?" It was at this point that I asked to talk to the person. The man on the phone sounded like he had been chain-smoking since birth. I asked him his name and whether he knew of any hotels nearby. He stumbled over his words and then said he had to go. I should have taken the hint and kicked her out of my truck, especially after watching so many horror films. But fearing that she might be telling the truth, I continued. It's funny how you overlook things like, I came from Alabama with my granddaughter and her dog, but I have a friend who's going to loan me money, even though I asked you, for some in the parking lot. It was possible, but extremely fishy. And why didn't she call her friend to come pick her up from the store? We soon turned down a street, and I saw a police car parked off to the side. I considered dropping her off with the officer, but I would feel awful if she was actually telling the truth. As we passed the cop, a strange, eerie smile formed on her face, and she said, "Glad he's here. Now I feel safe." As we entered the apartment complex, I saw how run down it was. It looked like the headquarters for heavy drug trafficking. It was a very unsettling environment, even in the snow. When I parked outside the place, she said, "Okay, I'm going to go get my friend. I'll be right back." I was extremely uneasy. Things just didn't feel right. She saw my expression of wanting to get the hell out of there, and saying something about me being a horrible person if I left her there in this weather with her condition. At this, I became angry. I had gone out of my way to help her. I've already done more than what most people would do. As I waited, I started thinking about what could happen. What if she brought back a gun, or worse? At that moment, I saw 3 men approaching my truck. I then realized I had to leave right away. She had set me up to be robbed or worse. These men were big, and one of them was hiding something behind his back. I put my truck in reverse and took off. Thank God for 4-wheel drive. Looking back, I saw them chasing me and noticed that one of the men was holding a crowbar. I don't know what would have happened, but looking back, I can see how naive I was. There was no hotel anywhere near that area. The nearest one was about 20 minutes away. Had I waited, they would have likely beaten and robbed me, possibly even killed me. I thank God every day that I escaped and was able to marry my girlfriend. I've never returned to that Walmart or that area since. A couple of months later, I told a coworker this story, and he said that same woman tried the same thing with him a year earlier, but he declined her outright. Smart move on his part. I have been debating whether to share this story, but I figured I might as well. This happened one day when I was probably 4 or 5 years old. We lived in a tiny town in North Carolina. The entire county had a population of roughly 5,000 people. We lived 10 minutes from the main township, and our neighbors were family. And they lived about an acre away in each direction. B knew everyone, and everyone knew us. When I was young, I had a particular fear of leaving my curtains up at night. I had to have my windows completely covered before I could fall asleep. I was too young to verbalize it at the time. But the idea of waking up with someone looking through my windows absolutely terrified me. After this incident, that fear only intensified. We lived pretty much by ourselves, out in the sticks. If anyone came onto our property, we would usually know who they are 9 times out of 10. So, when my father and older brother started spotting boot prints that didn't belong to them, we all got a bit nervous. living as far out as we did meant the police, fire department, or EMs would take much longer to reach us. My father taught my older brother, sister, and myself how to handle guns. Even at this early age, I was pretty proficient with my BB gun. Over the course of several days, they started noticing more boot tracks in the wood. Items were being moved around in the barn. And one morning, the entry door was left open, though we couldn't tell if anything was missing. It was clear that someone was snooping around at night. Since I was so young, my parents didn't want to frighten me. But my brother did. He told me that someone was creeping around the yard at night, and that one night I would wake up and find him in the house. To put it lightly, my brother was a bit of an expletive. He always made fun of me for not sleeping with my windows uncovered. He told me that I needed to face my fears, and during this time when someone was definitely sneaking around our property, he convinced me to sleep with my curtains drawn back. I hated to admit it, but I craved his approval more than anything. So I agreed. So, one night, I left my curtains open. It took a long time to fall asleep, but eventually, I nodded off. I've always been a light sleeper. Even the slightest gust of wind would wake me. I'd often wake up 4 or 5 times a night. That night, I heard the porch just outside my window creaking. I tried to ignore it, thinking that it was just my imagination. Then, a shadow passed over the light that was coming from the lamp outside my window. I opened my eyes and sat up. There was someone standing by the window, hands cupped against the glass. This was literally my worst fear come true. In the process of running out of my room, I pissed myself. I ran straight to my parents' bedroom. At the same time, the doorknob to the front door began to rattle. The intruder was trying to get inside. I managed to reach my parents' bedroom and told them what happened. My dad grabbed his gun and flashlight and headed outside. After nearly half an hour, my father came back in. His face was sweaty and pale. He sent my brother and me to bed, but we both sat up and listened. Clink. My father told my mom he found a tarp and a bunch of blankets, set up about a half a mile into the forest, just off a logging trail. Someone had been there for quite a while. My dad apparently tore the encampment apart after losing sight of him. The police came and took statements from my parents, then looked through the forest, but couldn't find anything. They figured that the guy wouldn't be back anytime soon, and we never saw him again. Now, I always sleep with my windows covered, no exceptions. In 1979, when my mother was attending college in North Carolina, one day she noticed someone was following her in a big car as she walked home one night from class. She tried her best to ignore it at first, but when it became obvious that she was being stalked, she became frightened. Thankfully, she saw a police car parked at the gas station nearby and ran to it. As soon as she did, the car that had been following her peeled off. Once she thought she was in the clear, she continued her walk home. Everything seemed okay until she had to cross a small footbridge into her neighborhood. Once she was over it, that same car came ripping round the corner. The man rolled his window down and tried to make small talk and asked if he could give her a ride home. "No thanks," she said, and started to turn away. At which point he reached over and grabbed her, then tried to pull her into the car. Poof. She managed to jerk away from him and ran to a house that was across the street, and the car peeled away. 2 weeks later, she awoke to the sound of her roommate screaming. When she got up and walked out of her room, she saw the same man standing in the middle of her living room, staring at her. She said the look on his face was calculating. The roommate then screamed, "Who the expletive are you, and what are you doing here?" He turned to her and replied, I forgot my guitar," and grabbed the guitar that was leaning on the wall. The roommate shouted, "That's my guitar," and he threw it to the ground and ran out. After reporting this event to the apartment manager, the manager told my mother that some guy had come by a few days earlier claiming that he was a family friend of hers and wanted to surprise her. So the apartment manager gave him pretty much every detail about my mom, where she worked, where she went to school, and her weekly routines. Of course, my mom flipped out on her, as anyone would. Even back then, it wasn't cool to just share personal information about other people to strangers. That was the last she ever saw of him, until several years later. She was reading a book about notorious serial killers in America and read the story of Mike. He had traveled all over the country sexually assaulting and murdering some of his victims. He was also a notorious counterfeiter. When she flipped the page and saw this man's picture, she freaked out. It was him, that same man who followed her in the car, the same man who showed up in her apartment. He was a serial rapist and a murderer. It's impossible to look back and not come to the conclusion that he was targeting my mother. When she told me this story, I started doing my own research. Records show that Mike DeBarden, a name that sends chills down my spine, was in the North Carolina area at the same time that my mom was attending college there. The victimology shows that he targeted women around 18 to 19 years old, which was my mother's age at the time. He died in 2011. Had things played out differently, I wouldn't be here today. I'm glad that he dropped his pursuit, but I wondered more often than I should as to why. I can only assume that his initial plan failed, and it would have been too easy to tie him to any crime committed against my mother, so it was a calculated decision to move on. His next victim, Lori Jensen, was not so lucky. In the spring of 2005, I was driving from Maryland to Florida for a major business conference. I had left my friend's house in Richmond in the wee hours of the morning. I had to stop around 5 a.m. in North Carolina to fill up one tank and empty another. I had just gotten back in the car and turned the ignition when there was a knock on the passenger side window.